longer to allow people. We'll just give it a little bit longer to allow people to join. We really appreciate everyone tuning in for today's webinar. This is the third instalment of Your Stories monthly webinar series, which focuses on topics relevant to the Disability Royal Commission. We know that many of you are joining during your lunch break or perhaps watching at home during the school holidays. So please relax, grab a coffee or a bite to eat, and we'll be underway very shortly. So we might get started. My name is Hiran Lakamwasim. I will be co-facilitating today's webinar together with my colleague Michele Prestia. We are both lawyers at Your Story Disability Legal Support, which is a free national legal service supporting people to share their experiences with the Disability Royal Commission. We both live in Adelaide, South Australia. I'm based at the Legal Services Commission of South Australia and Michele at the Aboriginal Legal Rights Movement. I would like to start this webinar by inviting Michele to do the acknowledgement of country.
Thank you, Hiran. Hiran and I are speaking from Kaurna country today, from which sovereignty was never ceded. I acknowledge and pay my respect to Kaurna elders past and present, and also to all Aboriginal people who are in attendance today. So today we have two guests, Tammy McGowan and Elise Moller, who will be discussing their experiences as autistic people in employment. This will then be followed by Q&A, which is open to anyone attending who would like to ask a question of Tammy and Elise.
Thanks, Michele. So just a few housekeeping matters. So this webinar is being recorded as well as live streamed to the Your Story Disability Legal Support Facebook page. We have Auslan interpreters joining us today and captions are available. To turn on the captions, please go to the toolbar at the bottom of your screen and click on the button labelled CC Live Transcript. Please post in the chat if you are having any tech issues. As Michele mentioned, we certainly encourage everyone to ask any questions that you might think of during the webinar, which we will try to get to at the end. If you are asking questions on Zoom, please use the Q&A function to ask questions rather than the chat button. And you are very welcome to ask a question anonymously if you would prefer. On Facebook, please post your questions in the comments. If we run out of time at the end and don't get to your questions, we will do our best to respond via email. This webinar may reflect on experiences of violence, abuse, neglect, and exploitation of people with disabilities. If this webinar raises any concerns for you, free counselling is available through Blue Knot, which can be reached on 1800 421 4468. As Michele mentioned, we are very fortunate to have two wonderful guest panelists join us for this webinar today. Our first guest is Tammy McGowan. Tammy is autistic and has raised two autistic children. She is a member of the Your Story Advisory Group and project officer at both the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network of Australia and New Zealand and Autism CRC, Sylvia Rogers Academy. Based in South Australia, Tammy is an experienced coordinator and trainer who has a 14-year history working in the community services sector with a focus on disability advocacy, social inclusion, and trauma-informed and person-centred practice. Tammy is also a maven for Scope Guild Global and a board member of the Autistic Realm Australia. Welcome, Tammy.
Elise is an Indigenous elite athlete and autism advocate on the autism spectrum, who is widely regarded as one of Australia's leading changemakers in autism. Her achievements include co-creating the world's first person-first autism course with Torrens University, becoming the AFL's first disability ambassador player, and founding Active Support, a social enterprise for at-risk people with disability. As a proud First Nations woman, and part of the LGBTQIA+ community and an elite athlete in mainstream sport with lived experience of autism and mental health, Elise will bring a unique, multifaceted insight to today's conversation about autism and employment.
Yes, we are very privileged to have two amazing guest panelists today in what I'm sure will be a very interesting webinar. So today's topic, titled Wanted Meaningful Employment for Autistic People, is a webinar about improving and sharing ideas for change with the Disability Royal Commission. As we know, many autistic people unfortunately face significant challenges finding and maintaining meaningful employment, which has a significant and ongoing personal impact. These barriers have been broadly identified by the Royal Commission as being attitudinal, physical and environmental, organisational and structural, which occur from recruitment and continue when people are within a job. Recent data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics has highlighted that the unemployment rate for autistic people has been around 34%, which is more than 3 times the rate for people with disability and almost 8 times the rate of people without disability. The data also shows that employers were the third most common source of discrimination for the 1 in 10 people with disability who reported experiencing it. These difficulties that autistic people face in finding and maintaining meaningful employment has been well documented, but regrettably, the barriers continue to exist for many. As part of the Disability Royal Commission, there have been 4 public hearings focusing on the challenges which people with disability have in finding and maintaining meaningful employment, with the most recent public hearing being earlier this month, which looked at the experiences of people with disability working in Australian disability enterprises. Understanding why these barriers exist and developing recommendations as to what needs to be changed going forward is one of the goals of the Disability Royal Commission. And it's why it is important that we have these conversations, that we ensure that the voices of autistic people are heard. So bringing in our guest panelists now, I'd like to perhaps start with a simple question, but one which we would really like to get right. Do you prefer to be referred to as an autistic person or a person with autism?
I'll go first on that one. Personally, I prefer to be referred to as autistic. Identity first language is often preferenced by autistic adults in the community. I see having autism as, or living with autism as carrying something like a handbag or living with a roommate named autism, whereas being autistic, it's my brain and how I operate.
This is an interesting one because when I was from the ages of like 12 to about 17, I wanted autism to be referred to as tree because I couldn't handle hearing about it because of all the conversations about it, and I really blamed it for being bullied and not being able to find a friend. Since then, I've been able to connect to community, understand what autism is, and realize that autism isn't the reason why I struggled and I experienced discrimination. It was because of the environment and the approach. So I say I'm autistic because I'm an advocate. When I work with people though, and when we're being with people, it's important to always go with how they identify. So for some people it might be Aspie, for other people it might be Asperger's, because that was a later pre-2012 term in the DSM. Some people it might be autistic, others it's person on the spectrum, others just Elise. So I don't mind as much because I'm quite proud of my autism and I'm proud of all my identities. But I think that's important to acknowledge.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tammy and Elise, for those insights. And yeah, I think the language which we use is incredibly important, and I'm sure our viewers will certainly find that helpful going forward. So as we know, World Autism Awareness Day was celebrated earlier this month on the 2nd of April, but I believe you would prefer it to be known as Autism Acceptance Day. Tammy, would you please explaining to our viewers why this distinction is so important?
Thank you for asking that. Awareness is an observation. Acceptance is action. I think that many people believe that they do understand or are aware of autism because they know someone who is autistic, or they've seen or heard things in the media about autism. But it's actually more helpful for autistic people to have the opportunities to be treated with the same respect as everyone else in Australian society and to feel accepted. We are asking for active supports from our allies now to make room for us at decision-making platforms, and rather than people just being aware of us, what we're asking for now is that society starts addressing some of those issues, as you discussed earlier, about autistic people being less likely to find employment, to complete education, and to live long, healthy lives compared to non-autistic Australians.
Yeah, definitely. For me, it's not just about knowing we're in the world. It's about it being more and more common for you to engage with us in sport, in education, and subsequently in employment. When you miss the first two, that's also going to make it less likely for us to get employed, because if we're the kids that are getting, and I was the kid that was getting taken to the SSG or the teacher with the teacher aid, my peers are going to be eventually employers, and they need to be exposed to me and have the teachers modeling, seeing my strengths and how to communicate and that sort of stuff. So it really comes down to the changes in the environment and the approaches to be accessible. For me, it's an attitude shift. It's not just about knowing we exist, but understanding us at a more personal level. It's not just the DSM-5 or the DSM-5 medical model, sorry. When we look at people who are different, we tend to have this deficit-based lacking perspective of comparing us to the majority, and comparing us to how we fit into, or how we, I guess, work in rigid systems like education that aren't designed with us in mind, because we are the minority, and comparing us to what society says is the right way to behave and socialize. Autism acceptance is also not having the end goal as just making sure that we've got the basic needs of fed and being sheltered and going to school. It's understanding that we have a right to feel and thrive. It's not seeing our behavior and responding by trying to stop the behavior with restrictive practices or bribery or discipline. Autism acceptance is looking deeper behind the behavior and understanding that behavior is communication. Autism acceptance, it's not trying to change us, or just having thinking it's normal for us to have hours and hours of therapy where we're receiving the message that to be accepted we need to learn how to mask, and those hours on top of our normal school education is really difficult. It's understanding that we need to learn through and creating safe, accessible opportunities, have genuine connection, like which is why I've created my organization. And finally, it's connection, it's true connection, it's safety, true safety, where our nervous system is in a calm space, able to learn. It's thriving and being excited and happy because we are able to access what we value rather than what other people believe is good.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there, Elisa. I think that idea of acceptance is a very powerful message, and certainly does demonstrate a more meaningful action than just awareness. So moving on to the issue of employment now, and perhaps I'll direct this question at you, Tammy. What does meaningful employment mean to you?
For me, meaningful employment is any involvement in society that makes individuals feel needed and wanted. This can include volunteering, paid employment, and being in a caring role. We want to see autistic people able to participate in activities that are valued by everyone and that are not underpaid or subsidized based on that individual's ability to talk about their disability status. We want to see autistic people feeling like they have multiple options for engagement in employment, and that we can ask for supports in the workplace without being penalised for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps following on from that question, what are the challenges autistic people face when seeking and retaining employment?
As you mentioned in the introduction, Haran, autistic people are grossly underemployed and unemployed compared to non-autistic people in Australia. We have many individuals who have multiple degrees who are unable to find work in the area that they've studied in. We know that autistic people are challenged from that very first stage of applying for work all the way through to maintaining employment. The current systems are not accommodating for many of us. For example, the interview process is designed to give a first impression of a person's social skills rather than focusing on if they could actually perform the tasks that are being advertised. There are very few workplaces in Australia that have active access and inclusion plans prepared for new staff who have a disability. And so autistic people are often put under pressure to disclose to their colleagues and to their employers that they're autistic to be able to ask for any accommodations. And this can happen before we even win a position. Many of us struggle to maintain that employment because our working conditions are so difficult and not sensory friendly, or we don't feel safe to ask for supports, or we don't feel embraced in the existing workplace culture.
Yeah, it's sad to hear that, and unfortunately, these are some quite common reflections from which we've heard from people sharing their stories with the Disability Royal Commission, and it's very disappointing to hear that many autistic people continue to face these types of barriers. But perhaps now looking at some of your own positive experiences within employment, how have you felt supported by your workplace?
Since I've had the opportunity to work in autistic-led and autistic-focused or disability-focused organisations, it has been a completely different experience from what I've had previously. I feel that my knowledge and my skills are finally being utilised, that my differences with my communication and sensory needs are completely accepted, that I can be transparent and authentic with my colleagues as things arise, and that I can ask for supports without it being a negative thing. I believe that I am treated equally in the work that I'm doing now, and that I'm encouraged to make those decisions and be part of the planning process for the future of the organisations. The difference is feeling like a valued team member as opposed to the token autistic person. I don't have to educate my colleagues all the time anymore about autism or my co-occurring conditions, and the expectations in the work culture are very different where I am now. I feel very privileged to be in this position, and I wish that all workplaces could be so accepting and willing to be flexible to support autistic people.
Yes, absolutely. But it is good to hear that you have had some positive experiences in the workplace, Tammy, and the importance of autistic-led and disability-focused organisations in creating supportive work environments. It's probably a good time to remind our viewers that the Disability Royal Commission doesn't just want to hear about the negative experiences, but also some of the positive experiences as well, which will certainly inform them when it comes to making their recommendations.
Our next question is for Elise. Elise, what additional challenges do you think Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with autism face when trying to find meaningful employment?
Yeah, so basically there needs to be safety and accessibility in all identities. So I'm autistic, the environment needs to be safe and accessible for me with my autism needs. I'm also First Nation, I'm also part of the LGBTQIA plus community, and I need, especially for the First Nation, there to be cultural safety and accessibility. And with the LGBTQIA plus, there needs to be, I guess, no like homophobia, no sex, like all that sort of stuff, sexism. So it's very difficult to access and locate autism services and supports. It's very difficult to, I think, even more difficult to access and locate First Nation services and supports. To find a service that understands both is, I haven't come across it yet until I'm part of Aspect, and they're really pushing to be able to do that both, but it's really, really rare. Like, following from what Tammy said, when we disclose our identity, it really is only as useful as the understanding of the person receiving what we're saying. So if I say, "Hey, I'm autistic," the person receiving it, the employer, is only going to understand what that means based on what their knowledge is, and it also has their bias. And as a First Nation person, that's exactly the same. And especially when, like, I don't get questioned. I'm Maltese, I'm Dutch, and I'm First Nation. I'm Maltese on both. My mum's Maltese on both sides, and my dad's mum is Aboriginal on both sides. So Wiradjuri and Palawa, and my dad's dad is Dutch. I don't get questioned how Maltese I am, despite me growing up in Australia. I've never gone to Malta. I can't speak the language, and I am quite connected to my mum's side as well. So it's not to discount that, but I am questioned a lot based on my appearance. People wanting to know how much Aboriginal am I, and the conversations really stopping at that. At, I guess, the questions that have come from the white policy, like basically trying to eradicate us. So there's the lack of understanding of the racism in usual questions that are asked. So there's a lot of biases, and I feel like sometimes I'm a walking political statement, and it's best for me, and I did that with my sport, to not disclose, to be able to get in. But then I also don't know what environment I'm in. So when I walk into, say for example, I walked into a gym, I walked into a gym in the past. This is my brain going, you got to be exact as to when it was. But anyway, I walked into a gym and I saw was like kind of mural with a black and white photo of a white man, and it was him saying he was the person in charge of all these colonies. Now, he wasn't First Nation, he was the white settler who was like, and that is complete cultural non-safety. Now, the fact that those exist in shires, in gyms, in libraries, I really need to see representation when I'm walking to a service that First Nation acknowledgement of country is there. And I can even read in the language if they've checked with a First Nation person, because if they say, "We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, past and present," that's not our language. We're custodians. We don't own the land owns us. So that's our belief. So there's so much knowledge that isn't in society that tells a First Nation person that they're not safe. Other things such as accessing sorry business, doing protocol such as a acknowledgement of country, like getting us to do a welcome to country, but only an elder can do that. Someone who's not, if I'm on Wurundjeri land and I'm a Wiradjuri person, I can't do a welcome to country, and I can either speak up and explain that and receive. Most of the time they don't. They're like, "Oh yeah, they don't really care," because then they'll use the same language in that. Or I can just kind of go along every day seeing, trees that aren't native to the land, seeing all these things that tell me that we've been invaded. And the final thing is things like getting asked, can you do, say for example, they do correctly ask me to do an acknowledgement of country, saying you've got a minute to do that, where that's not the purpose of our acknowledgement of country. It's actually for education. It's such a important cultural protocol. I think cultural protocol, it just comes in basically saying, first of all, we live here, and then secondary, this is the land of the dot dot dot. I know I'm second class to the land that I have the oldest living culture, and my blood runs deep, and I have such an intimate connection to this land. And yet the people who make decisions in services, in employment that I work in education, uh, don't understand that, and that is very difficult to live with. And then when you add the accessibility, it's like you can't even get into the door. um, Autism accessibility wise, there might be a social story, there mightn't be instructions on how to access the service. You haven't even got to the first step, and there's a lot. In saying that, there's a lot of knowledge out there. As long as it's not tokenistic, as long as we value the knowledge of the First Nation people, and we understand that it's not our responsibility solely to change it, but if we are, then that should be valued, that should be remunerated as a job, because we otherwise need to have our own job. There is a lot of hope and access to change, and I think that's why the Royal Commission into Disability is so promising, as long as the recommendations are implemented, which they weren't for the for the First Nation ones. So I think it takes a lot of synergy. We got to put our opinions there. They will be heard with the Disability Royal Commission, and then we need politicians, and we need governments, and we need services to implement it. It starts with us as the first step, giving our voice.
Thank you for that incredible answer. And I think I want to touch on a point that you just made that I think is really important, that it isn't on you as an Aboriginal woman with autism to educate your employer. There should be a safe space for you going into it. It shouldn't be your task to be an advocate for yourself every second of every day. So thank you for that answer. And in follow-up, the next question, Elise, is in your experiences within sporting organisations specifically, how accepting and inclusive do you think clubs have become of people with autism, and what more needs to be done to better support athletes with autism?
I love this because it's a funny response that I say to people, that I found the elite competing as an elite athlete far more accessible than being an athlete at the community level. It's because there was structure. You found out about the training plan the night before training. The bibs are washed, for example, at the elite level, which for someone with high sensory sensitivities, having a bib that's used the whole season by all these players that have it smells of BO and that sort of stuff, I can't participate in the drill. I need to, if I'm on the community level and I'm learning the instruction, I learn the drill, it will take me the whole drill to understand it. Where at the elite level, there was so much more organization and resources to not have autism be the disability that stops me, because my needs associated with my disability were provided for. So I had just the strengths of my autism, which got me to the elite level. The stimming, my passion, my special interest being sport is what got me to that level. I do want to also emphasize that whether it's grassroots, whether it's all abilities, whether it's elite, we're all athletes. And back to your question, the going through the pathways, I chose with football not to disclose my disability because of the initial intake. Basically, when I was trying to access education, there was a lot of discrimination associated with it, and a lot of permission for teachers to say the reason why I'm not coping is because of my autism, and that is quite. It was quite difficult. It was extremely difficult to receive, and had a lot of negative outcomes on my self-esteem, on my relationship with accessing school, with not wanting to go to school. So I chose for that not to be the way it went with my sport. In saying that, then I wasn't able to access a lot in the community level, and it took some really incredible people to see my strengths, even though I wasn't performing, to then give me opportunities in safe places. It actually was a First Nation state team that was the first thing, and I felt culturally safe, and I thrived in the training, in the trial setting. And it was through initially the First Nation that I went up until nationals. And then from there, I had the confidence to go forward. And when I got picked by Bulldogs and that sort of stuff, it was definitely when there was accessibility with that it worked. When I became the first AFL Disability Ambassador, I've seen such great work that's being done to create acceptance and inclusivity in saying that it can be done, and we need to do it though in all sports, not just AFL. And it's important as well that we're not being segregated to our own team, that we're ensuring that all teams, all clubs ensure the standard that best coaching practice is where we exist and thrive as neurodivergent people. And even accessibility to like change rules, even if it's not neurodiversity and it's a physical difference. Change rules, and it's really, really simple. Like I went to CEDA, I was just doing coaching through the school because it's a sports school, and you can easily change rules in games to make sure that someone is included. Like a goal can't be scored unless people with the bibs are touch the ball, and one of the people with the bibs has, like it's just so simple. It's interesting. I'll say this comedic because sometimes you need to warn people when an autistic is making a joke, because the stigma is that we can't joke. I just struggle understanding jokes, but a bit of, oh my God, I've forgotten what I was going to say. What I was going to say is, the people, we always get called rigid. We do. We always get called rigid. The rigid ones are definitely the people in power. They're like, no, this is the way it's always been done. It works for the majority. That's it. It's like, no, you know what? Especially when someone is autistic and we have teacher aid funding that should not be used then for other students. It should be used for that individual, and the teacher aid funding should be more accessible. That's one point. But especially because we have resources, that should mean that our education, our assignments and all that sort of stuff should be amended for our special interest. If you want us to prove that we have the skills to do an essay and that's the assessment, don't get us to then read, sorry, my mind's going everywhere. But I was going to say, don't get us to read Diary of Anne Frank, which is a new thing that we're not interested in, and then assess us on how we write an essay on that. Also, it shouldn't be Diary of Anne Frank. We had a cultural genocide in our own country. Why are we looking at another country's one? But anyway, get us to do it. Say, for example, mine's on sport. Get us to do the essay on the sport, the special interest, and leverage our motivation, our autistic gifts in our special interest. Leverage that motivation for us to reach success, because I'll do a better essay than anyone's ever done. We got to have purpose and things. Like, wear a magnifying glass for what doesn't work. If it doesn't work for Ralph and he gets by and he just doesn't like school, it's not going to work at all for Elise. If it works good, if you're a good teacher, it's going to work for me, and you'll get even me, I'm excited now, but when I'm excited, I'm excited. When I'm not interested, good luck. Sorry to the people who are waiting on me to send invoices, but I'm not interested in that admin stuff of my business. But anyway. Oh, sorry, your question. I think I answered it.
You definitely did, and that was an amazing answer. So I don't want to add anything more to that. I want to just let that sit there. So thank you.
Yeah, what an amazing response, Elise. And I think we had a comment from one of our viewers that she's saying she loves the point Elise just made on us not being rigid, that the people in power are the rigid ones. So certainly a very eloquently put statement. So we mentioned at the start some of the alarming statistics regarding the unemployment rate for autistic Australians. And Tammy, I'll start with you. What do you think employers and perhaps society in general should do to assist autistic people in obtaining meaningful employment?
And I was muted. I apologise. Two things. Firstly, for employers and colleagues, there is so much information available to you now to help you support autistic team members. There are many organisations in Australia that provide direct education about autism in the workforce. Every workplace is going to be different. Every individual is going to be different. But there are resources, for example, Autism CRC have developed a manual specifically for employers called the Integrated Employment Success Tool, or in brackets IEST, and that's an evidence-based guide for autistic adults, and it aims to improve everyone's understanding of what accessible and successful workplaces look like. My second point is that we are asking everyone to start having the conversations with us, with autistic people. We want to share our experiences, and we want to support other people to have lives and feel happy in them, and to be able to work. There are so many online groups that are autistic led that share excellent resources, including the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network of Australia and New Zealand, the Autistic Realm of Australia, Reframing Autism, Autism Inclusivity, ICANN, and People with Disability Australia, where people can ask questions and find fresh resources and have live responses. We are really trying to educate the public about what it feels like for us and how you can support us. And we're also trying to make sure that there is a positive way forward for our children and for your children if you're a parent or carer of an autistic person. So please reach out to us, because we're here for that.
Yeah, I think there is a tendency for many employees to still hang on to some quite outdated and outdated views and myths about autistic employees, despite them being proven wrong time and time again. And there's so many resources available now that there really shouldn't be any excuse for employers not hiring and supporting autistic people at work.
Yeah, and not looking forward as well, because like look forward to hiring an autistic, because I haven't met someone who can do a job better than employing someone whose special interest is that job. We're extremely loyal. So to answer your question about what we think employers and perhaps society should do to assist people with autism obtain meaningful employment, basically set us up for success. It really begins at the very beginning, seeing the job application, making sure that job application is accessible, right up to the climbing ranks of us becoming the employer. No, I'm joking. World domination. But basically, like things like having a social story on what to expect when you come to the interview, or even having the interview accessible from Zoom, or what it looks like, for example, when you come in and you do your normal job. So that can be accessed and processed days before in the safety of your own home, and that really assists that then when you're there, that processing isn't a limitation to actually taking in then what the instructions are. Making sure those interview questions are provided prior, making sure your communication is accessible, so structuring meetings and conversations and having clear transition times, accessible humor, so allow for like not having sarcasm. There's humor that isn't sarcastic, that isn't you can have literal humor, for example, and not creating culture where there isn't hurtful humor. It's not at the person's expense, and it's never pointing out someone's in your perception someone's lacking, because that's gonna make us not able to perform at our best, because it creates self-doubt. When you do communication, having video screen tutorials, allowing for non-verbal written instructions that is in line with our executive functioning abilities, so step by step, just as if you were to do what are they called, like when you do the ingredients, like when you're a recipe, like do this and this and this. Don't assume. Allow for like voice, like there's apps, there's applications such as like Voxer, so allowing for voice conversations I much prefer that than phone calls, because the phone call, you got to think about actually socializing. Hi, how you going? Yeah, good, thanks. Like one time my cousin was telling me, like we were just having a conversation. He asked me about my mum, and I was like, she's well, thanks. How's your mum? But I forgot that my auntie, his mum had died. But I was literally like so focused on the conversation. So Voxer and things where you can ask someone, you can just go, hey, blah blah blah, can you come and do this? And then the person can replay the message and then go in whenever they need and can do it. It's not a phone call. Hey, how you going? Can you do that? Allow and structured emails. We've gone over that. So Zoom meetings allow them to be without a camera, allowing for movement, and actually naming, have an inclusion statement at the beginning, like naming you in this meeting, like we allow you to have your camera off, we allow you to move around, whatever you need to be able to do your job effectively. Having an autistic advocate or consultant, such like someone with lived experience, come in and actually do an audit. Making sure your environment is sensory friendly, so smell, like if you can, put a ban on, like that's what I do with my organization. No coffee before this amount of time, no perfume or colognes, because that's inaccessibility. Like I would hate it, I'd need help, but I'd hate it when a teacher came and went next to me and goes, what do you got? Because they would either smoke, or they had cigarette smell, or they had really strong perfume, or they'd be like, oh, the kid doesn't like me. And it's like, no, it's just not accessible. But I translated it as a year 9, not going, oh no, it's not accessible to my sensory needs, because I had no idea. I translate it to, yeah, I don't like you, get away from me, and just like doing everything I could to make sure that they're not doing it. And my education suffered. Seating, having vestibular input. So like I've got a bit of a, what do you call it? A movement chair. Like it's really good. And providing fair and financial remuneration for time, that like valuing someone's time. And the most important thing, you normally start with the most important thing. Like my brain goes chronological, my brain goes do it first, but I'm like, people might forget, do it last. The most important thing is literally ask us as your employer, ask us and be open to that. If we say it's valuable and it's needed, regardless of what might happen, if someone else might need it, or regardless of if it's the first you've heard about it. And be open to feedback by those who may support us with advocating. Despite people's age, it could be their parent. Despite what you see, that's employment-wise, but even in school, I kept it together in school and unleashed the fury for my mum. And my mum would message school saying, there's high anxiety, Elise isn't sleeping, blah, 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 blah. School's like, Elise is fine. Know that and value other people's eyes, and that we might lean on the people that support us to help us advocate, and being open to that. Hope you grabbed a pen and paper, because Tammy's, I was like, wow, this is so good. And then, yeah, so information overload. This webinar is not autism friendly. Now we've got the Auslan interpreter, we've got the audio, you can rewind, you can watch it, we're all good.
Yeah, thanks very much, Elise. Some very practical tips there, and I really hope there are some employers tuning into this webinar today. And also, as colleagues, there's certainly a lot of takeaways that we can get from that. So thanks very much. And yeah, there was a comment from Facebook saying, I'm learning so much. Thank you. So moving on to the next, I'm just a bit conscious of the time. We've only got 15 minutes and we'd like to get to some questions at the end, and there's a chance we might go over time. So just bear with us. So the Disability Royal Commission is investigating the mistreatment of people with disability in all contexts and settings, including workplaces, as we've discussed. If I might ask, starting with you, Tammy, have you shared your own experiences with the Disability Royal Commission?
I have now, but I did procrastinate about doing it for a long time, and there were a few reasons for that. I found the session schedule a little bit confusing. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to respond to. I felt like I had so many things to say about so many different things, and I really wasn't sure where I was even going to start. I spoke to you, as we both are in South Australia, about making the submissions, and I just started with dot points and just started putting things down under each session where I had something significant that I needed to share. I've got 7 of those done so far. I know there'll be more that I want to speak to, but it was important for me to know also that it was safe for me to be saying what I was saying, that, I was legally protected, that it was going into the right categories, and also bringing up some of those memories and writing them down. It was difficult for me at times. There was a lot of sad things and really angry things that I had to report about and talk about. But I also feel empowered by this experience, that these things are not going to just be forgotten and put away, that people have to listen to it, that people have to record it. And I really do believe that the commissioner or commissioners will actually listen to what I have to say. I share Elisa's hope that the recommendations from this will be applied broadly, nationally, but at least these things that I've experienced aren't just stuck in my memory now, where people literally can be forgotten. Things can be forgotten. It's on paper and it's part of legal history now, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And many people certainly do feel empowered when they share their experiences with the Royal Commission. And many people not just do it because it's important to them, but also because what they might put forward could impact the lives of other people as well going forward. So, it is a very meaningful thing to do, and does have the potential for creating positive change going forward. We certainly appreciate that it can be very traumatic, and it's never easy reliving those experiences. But there are free support services available, and I should also mention that there is still time to share your submissions, as the closing dates, they're still open until the 31st of December later this year.
Do I go?
Yeah, go for it, Elise.
Okay. Sorry. I was thinking last time I just jumped in and I was like, I think I read out the question and I'm like, was I doing Mikkel's job? But anyway, so I haven't submitted anything to the Royal Commission into disability. I was part of a previous Royal Commission submitting something, and it was a validating experience, but it was a very big experience for me, and there was a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear in bringing up old wounds, because I have a lot more good days than so it's like when I did my previous one for a different Royal Commission, I was in a much worse place, and I don't know, I haven't, it's interesting to hear, and it's helpful to hear from Tammy that from someone who is so I would relate myself to a similar place as she is now, to go, okay, well, this was my experience, because I can only speak from when I did my previous one. It was, so it took a lot out of me, but it was really, really a validating experience. I walked away with hope that what they did and the pain that they caused, it stops with me, and reclaiming power in finding my voice again after it was silenced for so long. I'd previously gone to police for the thing that the previous Royal Commission was for, and that was a very inaccessible experience where you're questioned, and it was traumatic. But my experience with the Royal Commission was very different, and I was invited to share only what I was comfortable with, and I was believed. In saying that, it might be helpful to share that the hope that my mum had in me being part of the Royal Commission, the previous one, was a lot higher than mine, and it took a lot of time for me to become open to it. Like, it took weeks for me to become open to it. And if my mum had have pushed me, I don't think I would have actually been able to experience it as a positive experience. So I guess when there's trauma, it involves so many people. It definitely involves involves the parent because they feel it, it's their kid, and it also involves the individual, and both people, both carers, both parents, and both the individual is able to submit to their case to the Royal Commission. And it shouldn't be a forced experience. It should be an invitation that is accessible, and with accessibility and setting the person up for success, it's going to be a positive experience.
Yes, absolutely. And I understand that you featured in an earlier Disability Royal Commission video. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. Oh, I'm not good with broad, or like I'm good with specific. Was that it?
Yes. Oh, no,
Yes.
that was just a fun fact.
Fun fact. Yes, I did.
Elise has certainly been very involved with the Royal Commission.
And I should say I am gonna do mine. I'll do some on as a person that provides supports to isolated young people who are they access child protection. So I will be saying things against the child protection, but which is yeah. Anyway, I'll be saying, oh my God, am I legally now? Can they come after me? Anyway, that's a different talk. I will say it again if I need to. I said it in the Aspect Awards ceremony speech. I said it. If you want to know why I have a problem with that system, go to that. It was streamed. Anyway, I'll be saying some of the things as a provider where my clients do not access their rights and have access discrimination, neglect, abuse, that sort of stuff. And I will be speaking as well on my own things. For the presentation where I was a presenter, I don't quite identify as that person because I wore a lot of makeup, so you'll see it and you'll like. So I was specifically as presenter then.
The next question is for both Tammy and Elise. How important is it to both of you that autistic voices specifically are heard by the Disability Royal Commission?
I'll go first. Autistic people have unique experiences directly related to us being autistic, and I think it's so important that we need to let the commissioners know what we've lived through, what our families have lived through. And I'm personally concerned that we haven't had as many submissions from autistic Australians as from other minority groups in Australia. I would like autistic people to know that, as Haran's already mentioned, it is definitely not too late to make a submission, that you will be supported. I have been. You don't have to know the exact dates or have very specific memories to make a submission. You don't have to write a big, massive essay. You can talk about your experiences with one of the Your Story Disability Legal Support team. You can contribute with pictures, interpretive dance, videos, anything. But we do need to be heard, and it doesn't have to be you making a phone call, because I know a lot of us don't like that. There's lots of different avenues for contacting the team, but we really need to get our stories out so that we can be included in this moment of history, and so that autistic people in the future may be able to be protected from some of the things that we've had to live through.
Yeah, it is super important. We are largely misunderstood, and also that can contribute to discrimination. But at the same time, things are happening where there is clear prioritizing money, and things being seen as efficient, which is short term and very, very detrimental and traumatic. And there is also intentionality behind what we experience. So it needs to be told. Discrimination is silenced and unchallenged unless we do something about it. By speaking and sharing your story, you're bringing about change. It's a validating experience to have your voice and story heard, and to know what happened to you will not happen again. It's empowering to be part of change so that your pain has purpose, and you turn from feeling like a victim, which you do when your voice isn't heard and things have just happened, and you turn to a bit of a victor of, you know what, that thing in history, I was part of that. And I want to say as well, I feel like being like, oh yeah, present it, like it was good because the Royal Commission, Your Story Legal, you got people with lived experience to present. So someone wasn't, the other person was had a physical disability, and I myself presented as someone. So the process, from my experience, that you guys have gone through to create this Royal Commission has really, really been accessible, and our voices from the moment of advertisement to this, to when we like engage, from what Tanny's saying and all of that, like it's by far, like it's, I can sniff tokenism, and I can tell when a psychologist is speaking like this and I'm like 14 years old, and then they turn to the mum or my mum and then they speak normal. It's like, and they'll even do it like when you're 18, when you're 25, like, oh, I can sniff it when, like, I work in care teams with Allied Health, and they just can't get past the fact that their colleague is an autistic, and that my wisdom is 25 years worth, and the amount of people I've worked with autism, as opposed to a 4-year, they've studied where a component has been autism. It needs to be, I value professionals. It needs to be equal, not hierarchy. But anyway, yeah. Side story. I can smell tokenism. This is not tokenistic. I wouldn't be part of tokenism. I speak too much, and I wouldn't be able to hold my tongue, and I'm too much of a liability for me to be part of tokenism. I couldn't be loyal to what we don't do it, and that is a strength of autism.
Absolutely, Elise, and those are certainly some very powerful points to end on. I'd just like to let our viewers know that unfortunately we have run out of time, and we will lose our Auslan interpreters, David and Marnie, but thank you both very much for assisting us with this webinar today. We will still continue with the webinar and get to some of the questions from the audience if you'd like to stick around. So I want to direct this at you, Tammy. Is any work being done within the government education sector to make them a more inclusive employer at a school level?
Sorry, muted. Really not fast on the mute button. I apologise, everybody. Yes, there is a lot being done with government and non-government in the education sector. Positive Partnerships, for example, specifically have training available for parents and carers of young people who are autistic, and they also train educators. Autism CRC has an entire program for educators called Inclusion Ed, and so that's there to support teachers. And again, I feel like we're having that societal shift where people are starting to come back and approach autistic-led organisations and online support groups with questions. So there's never been a better time to be autistic and be in the education space.
Thanks, Tammy. And the Department of Education may have different programs or initiatives in different jurisdictions, so certainly touch base with them. And you can also contact your local department or national organisation, such as the National Disability Coordination Officer or the Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Employment and Training for more information. What question for Elise? What would you like to see come out of the Disability Royal Commission?
On a high level, I would like to see that our disability is not a reason for exclusion or discrimination, that disability isn't associated with like that we look at disability and our instinct is to go, that is a person who experiences disadvantage and inaccessibility in the environments and the approach when accessing education, school systems, blah, blah, blah. Not disability is the person because they're autistic. We can create accessibility in this world. I can have environments where I thrive with my autism and because of my autism, but when my needs aren't supported and they're not met, it's just a more significant barrier for me to access my potential. Where someone else, it's like I often talk about, I'm a bit of a four-wheel drive and other people are a Formula One race car. They can, or even just a normal car, they can go on any terrain, but they're not as good as, they can't really get as high on the hill and have the friction that I do, that the focus all my autistic skills in my terrain. However, if you put a four-wheel drive on a Formula One race car or just a normal road, it's gonna be clunky. It's gonna be difficult. I want that inclusion to be a space for us to leave when we so it's not creating a space, for us to leave the room when things get too much. Yes, that's an accessibility need, and we should create sensory safe places. However, inclusion is making sure that you are aware of the access needs and that the environment that works for majority is accessible to the lighting, to the sensory needs, so that I don't need to leave the room when it gets too much. I can actually access the education in the classroom because it's catered for me. I initially, there was a space in year 9, year 10 where that was starting to be I was allowed to leave the room when it got too much, and I was feeling really, really good about it. It's like, I'm getting so much more out of the lesson because I'm able to go for a quick run, recharge, come back, rather than me waiting, and then I get in trouble and there's a ripple effect. But I'm at the stage where now I'm 25, I've worked with a lot of people on the spectrum at once. So we're talking a group of 18 students in primary school who all have autism, and any teacher would say that's a recipe for a disaster, but I could raise the room in high energy, and then when we needed, I could change the environment and change how I present to be able to lower it without saying, Jimmy, stop doing that, and that sort of stuff. De-identified name, by the way. And so we should be a step ahead now, to not just go what yes, it's great that you're creating recharge spaces, but there's resources if you contact autistics, if you contact our organizations and that sort of stuff, for us to tell you how to do better to make what you do great accessible to us. It's ensuring that systems and groups are accountable to be resourced, to ensure that environments are accessible to us and that we thrive, that true inclusion is that I thrive being myself and access what I have a right to. And what I really want from the Royal Commission long term is to know that there's a nationwide investigation into discrimination for people with disabilities. So how we experience our disability, how we experience discrimination, abuse, neglect that comes with it. It's our chance to let the country know, because what I'm looking forward to is end goal, and pretty much as soon as it's published, is that it ensures accountability, that there'll be recommendations made that will bring about lasting change to ensure that what happened to you does not happen again.
Yes, thanks very much for that, Elise. And we might just finish with one more audience question, and I'll direct this to you, Tammy. What will it take to have meaningful support integration in mainstream organisations like McDonald's and Hungry Jack's for young people with ASD?
Look, it's a fantastic question. A couple of responses to that. Firstly, we are seeing that shift in Australian society where employers are interested in learning more about supporting neurodivergent employees. It really is getting better. It's getting safer out there. There are a lot of excellent evidence-based programs that young people can be involved in. One example of that for the person asking the question with the 16-year-old is to go to Autism CRC and look at the My Way employability program, which is designed specifically for autistic people to think about their career path and what they want to do and how to use their skills and knowledge. It's about educating employers. So for example, Autism CRC and DXC Technology sponsor the Autism at Work Summit annually now, and that's an opportunity for everybody to get involved and to learn more about employment from the autistic and employer perspectives. The Autistic Self-Advocacy Network of Australia and New Zealand are currently funded under a grant for a user-led design group with autistic people designing resources for self-advocacy for other autistics. So those resources are starting to flow through. Similarly, Autism CRC have just started a self-advocacy at work program for autistic adults to co-design resources and tools for other autistic people to use. So as I said earlier, it's a good time at the moment because we do have that social movement happening where we are trying to encourage, that excellent support and awareness, education and acceptance for autistic people in the workplace. I am sure that Elise would also encourage people to use active support services, for example, Elise's business that we have referenced a couple of times today. And I know that we've run out of time and can't answer any more questions, but for any parents or carers of autistic people who are autistic themselves or who are not autistic, I really do want to encourage you to look at the autistic-led organisations that we've referenced today, because they exist to provide information and support for everyone. And there is this myth that there's this huge divide between autistic adults and autistic parents and carers, and we want that myth to be broken down because we all have the same goal, which is seeing autistic young people survive and thrive in society. So check us out, talk to us, give us a chance. Thank you.
I just want to end by thanking Tammy and Elise so much for their time. Seriously, we're so honoured to be able to hear from you both and everything you're sharing with us. So thank you again. I would like to also remind everyone tuned in that free support is available for people wanting to share their stories through the Disability Royal Commission. Your Story Disability Legal Support gives legal support in a way that works for you. You can get in touch. You can get in touch with us via phone, email, or by using the online form on the Contact Us page of our website. We would love to hear from you and complete our survey by scanning the QR code or by following the link that appears on the screen at the end of the webinar.
And a recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel and Facebook page. Just search Your Story Disability Legal Support. I'd just like to close this webinar by saying that this Disability Royal Commission has been a long time coming, and it is an amazing opportunity for your voice to be heard. But there's still a lot of work to do, and we would certainly encourage all of our viewers to share your stories so that positive and meaningful change can be made going forward. And just a reminder that if this webinar has raised any concerns for you, free counselling is available through Blue Knot on 1800 421 468. Thanks again for joining us today, and we hope to see you at the next Your Story webinar.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys.